Today we're going to learn how to make beautiful calligraphy art using the app Procreate. Procreate is one of my favorite creative tools. It's an amazing app for the iPad, and if you're not familiar with it, it basically works like a digital sketchbook with all of your favorite tools built right in. Pens, pencils, brushes, and so much more. Before we jump into learning how the app works, let's quickly take a look at all the tools you'll need to follow along today. The first thing we'll need is an Apple iPad. Unfortunately, Procreate isn't available for Android devices. And even though it works great with a wide variety of iPad models, the model that you have does make a difference. I won't get into all the technical details, but the primary specs that make a difference are the capacity, the RAM, and the chip. The quick version is the more capacity and RAM you have, the better, and the faster the chip, the better. But again, it will work great with a wide variety of models. To go along with the iPad, I highly recommend the Apple Pencil. There are two versions of the Pencil, a first and second generation model, and each is compatible with different models of iPad. So just be sure to check which pencil is compatible with the iPad you have or plan to get. This is probably obvious, but you'll also need the app Procreate for iPad. At the time of this video, the app is around $10 in the App Store, and I honestly can't recommend it more highly. It's one flat cost with no subscriptions, and they regularly release new updates with amazing features. We'll also need some brushes for this workshop. Fortunately, Procreate comes with some wonderful default brushes, but it really doesn't include any that are suitable for writing in black letter styles, which is what we'll be using today. If you'd like to follow along though and don't have any black letter brushes, you can get a few free ones by joining my newsletter community at blackletterfreebies.com. I also have complete black letter brush collections that include scroll nibs, different angles, and more in my shop at blacklettershop.com. Those are all the tools we'll need today, so let's take a quick tour of Procreate before we jump into the project. A brief note, I'll be focusing mainly on the features that we're going to be using for the project, but feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have questions or would like to see a more complete tutorial on my YouTube channel. Okay, let's start the tour. To begin our tour, I'm going to start by launching the Procreate app, where we'll be greeted with the gallery view. If I step back here, you'll be able to see stacks of several different drawings. So you can think of the gallery view as like a desktop where you can stack collections, each containing several individual drawings. I'm going to step back to the initial stack that I loaded, and I'm going to create a canvas, which you can think of as our drawing surface, similar to a piece of paper. I create a canvas by tapping on this plus sign in the top right corner of the screen, and when I tap that plus sign, I'll be greeted with several options. Several of these are available by default. Some of these are my own custom options. You can create a canvas that has the same dimensions as your screen or any number of other canvas sizes. To create your own custom canvases, you just tap this black rectangle at the top right corner of the panel, and we'll see the custom canvas settings. I can specify a canvas of almost any dimension I want. Let's pick 5,000 by 5,000 here. One thing to remember when specifying your canvas size is this notification here. It will make a little bit more sense when I dive into the tutorial, but depending on the canvas size that you specify, you'll be limited to a certain number of layers to work with. And generally speaking, the more layers you have to work with, the better, but you may not use the maximum number available all the time. The key when selecting a canvas size is to think about your end application. Are you trying to create an image that you can use on social media, in which case you may not need a very high resolution canvas, or are you trying to create an image that you plan to print and create a large, high quality art print, in which case you may want a higher resolution canvas size. For our workshop today, I'm just going to use the default screen size for the canvas, so I just need to tap this option at the very top. Now that we've selected the dimensions for our canvas, we see our drawing area here. You can think of this canvas area as a blank sheet of paper upon which you can draw. In working through the canvas tools, I'm going to start in the top right area here, and then we'll work our way to the left later. The first tool that we'll step through today are brushes, which are indicated by this brush icon here in the top right corner of the screen that's currently highlighted blue on my iPad. When I tap on the icon, this panel will open, and you can see here on the right individual brushes. As I'm selecting them, each of the individual brushes is turning blue. On the left side of this panel are brush sets. You can think of each of these sets as a collection of individual brushes. Procreate comes with several brush sets by default, and they tend to be the ones that have these fancy icons here on the left. I'll first demonstrate how the brushes work, and then we'll jump into how to install custom brushes of your own. I'm going to select a sketching brush to start, and we'll begin with the 6B pencil here. When I tap on the screen, the panel will vanish, and I can start drawing with my pencil. A couple of features to be aware of when working with Procreate and with the Apple Pencil is that the Apple Pencil supports both pressure sensitivity and angle sensitivity. What that means is, for pressure sensitivity, the lighter that I draw with the brush, the lighter the line. The darker that I press the pencil onto the screen, the darker the line, as you can see here. So over here on the left, I'm putting very little pressure and I'm getting a light broken up line. And as I apply more pressure, the line gets darker. Now, the pencil also supports angle sensitivity, which means if I tilt the brush to the side, it will work like a normal pencil and will tend to create a thicker line, like so. As I move the brush further, more perpendicular with the screen, I'll get a finer line, like you can see here. So it works a lot like a regular pencil, which is pretty awesome. One feature that I'm going to introduce now, because I may not want to hang on to these cool amoeba-like lines on my screen, is tapping to undo and redo. If I tap the screen with 2 fingers, it will undo the last action that I took. So you should see some of these lines that I drew begin to disappear. If I ultimately decide that what I created was an amazing masterpiece and that I'd like to keep the art that I made, 3-finger tap on the screen will bring everything that I just did back. Okay, so that's undo, and here's redo. So I'm going to back up and clean my canvas. I'm just going to keep undoing and all of my strokes are gone. Procreate comes with a lot of awesome brushes, but it doesn't really come with anything that works for writing black letter calligraphy. That's why I created sets of brushes that you can purchase on my shop at blacklettershop.com, or you can download a free sample set by joining my community newsletter at blackletterfreebies.com. I'll now walk you through how to install your own custom brushes. I'm going to demonstrate this by first deleting this set. I tap on the brush set and then tap delete. It will ask me to confirm and I will remove that brush set. So you can see now that the first set of brushes on top of my library here is the workshop set. There are several ways that you can add your own brushes to Procreate, and I'm going to demonstrate what I think is one of the easier approaches. When you download brushes, again, these are individual brushes, or brush sets, these are brush sets over here, you will download a file that ends in either .brush or .brushset as the extension. What I like to do is download those files onto a cloud service like Dropbox or in the Files app if you have a Mac or an iPad. And once you do that, you'll see here I have tgsampler.brushset as a file that I can load into Procreate. All I have to do now from within the Dropbox app on my iPad is tap on that brushset file and it will automatically be imported into Procreate. And you see here the new set of brushes appeared at the top of my brush library. Now that I have my new custom brush set installed, I can select any brush and start to work with it on the canvas. I'm now going to undo that wonderful stroke and demonstrate a couple of the on-screen tools that you can use to work with brushes. The first tool is this slider on the left side of your screen. If I slide this slider all the way to the top, you'll notice that the brush gets much wider. As I slide it further down, you'll notice that the brush gets slimmer. So this slider here impacts the size of the brush you're working with and will allow you to customize it to any size that you want to work with. I'm going to undo a few of these strokes and start again. I'm going to make it the largest size possible and demonstrate what this second slider does. This second slider on the left controls the opacity of a brush. What that means is, if I draw a line at 100% opacity, it will be completely black. If I move the slider down to around 50%, the line will then be halfway transparent. If I reduce the slider to say 30%, you'll see that the line becomes more transparent. And what that means is that I can see through the line. Also, if I layer lines on top of each other, you'll see that they get darker as I layer more lines on top of one another. Now that we understand the brush size and opacity, I'm going to undo this magnificent masterpiece and we'll start to talk about color. The color panel is at the top right corner of the screen. There are several ways that you can pick colors. This disc method offers a range of hues around the outer edge and then a variety of saturation and darkness or lightness here in the center circle. They also have a classic color picker that will let you slide here to select a color and then here the saturation and the brightness as well using 3 sliders, or just by tapping around on your screen and selecting colors. There's also a color harmony tab that will let you, with one color selected, right now I'm using purple, will indicate some other color options that may work for the color based on some color schemes, such as complementary, split complementary, analogous, triadic, and tetradic. So if I tap any one of these, you'll see that the additional colors move around, but give me suggestions of a color that might work with the one that I've selected. And it is dynamic and will adjust as I move my selected color around. As you can see here, the analogous follows my green around. There's also a value tab where you can select colors based on specific RGB values or hue, saturation, and brightness values. Or you can add a hexadecimal code in here to select any color. One of the most fun ways to work with colors, though, is to use the palette. A palette is just a selection of colors that you have available to you by default that you can pick from. So if I pick this super bright red color and then start writing on my screen, that you'll see that my brush is now bright red. I can also click any one of these squares to change the color of my brush that I'm drawing with. And again, the opacity slider will also work with any color that you select. Procreate comes with some color palettes by default, but you can also load or create your own if you'd like. I can create a new color palette by tapping on the plus sign here on the top right corner of the page and selecting the Create New Palette option. You can see that my new palettes appeared here. Now, if I go back to my color picker, I can select any color here and then just tap on the palette to add it to my palette. If I move the sliders around and pick a new color, I can then tap on an adjacent square and add that new color to a brand new palette. One other fun way to create palettes, though, is by using a photo. I can do that by, again, tapping on the plus sign here in the top right corner, and then I can select a photo either by taking a picture with my camera, from my camera roll on my phone, or by selecting a file. I'm going to use this option here. And from within a folder on Dropbox, I have several photos. Some of these are landscapes or paintings. I'll choose this landscape by default, which is a waterfall. And you'll see here that it created an entire palette of colors just based on colors it found in that picture. So this is a really cool way to create a palette of colors that you like from a favorite photo. Now that we know how to work with color, I'll demonstrate some of the other tools that are here in the top right corner of the screen. This tool here that looks like an eraser is the eraser tool. If I select the eraser tool, I can then erase any work that I've got on the screen. A couple of notes to be aware of when using the eraser is that it's also influenced by the brush size here. So a larger brush will create a larger eraser mark, a smaller one will create a smaller eraser mark. Another property of the eraser to be aware of is that it's also influenced by the opacity slider. So if I want to just do some light erasing, I can move the opacity down and lightly remove areas of the drawing rather than completely erasing them. The second last tool in the top right corner here that I'll go over, but I won't spend too much time on, is the smudge tool. I just want you to be aware that it exists. Basically what the smudge tool does is very similar to its name. It allows you to smudge your work. So I can blend an area of my art, and I can also blend two areas together, creating a combination of the colors. I can blend from left to right to move some red into the green, and I can move from right to left and blend some of the green into the red. So it basically pulls and blends the colors around. Something to be aware of with the smudge and eraser tools are that they also use the same brush library as the brush tool does. The last tool in the top right corner here is the layers panel. You can think of working with layers as working with multiple sheets of paper stacked on top of each other. For anyone who remembers working with overhead projectors and transparency slides, it's very similar to that as well. I can work on multiple layers, and each layer will be independent from the one underneath it. So if I add a new layer here, and now using my blue color, go back to my brushes and draw a blue line from left to right, this blue line now sits on top of the red and green line on the layer underneath. I can now turn this layer off and on by tapping on this check mark to reveal the layer underneath. And I can also reorganize or move layers to change what's on top. So I can long press on layer 1, hold and move it above layer 2, and now the red and green lines are on top of the blue one. One other handy feature of working with layers is that I can change the opacity of a layer to make it more or less transparent. That comes in really handy when you're working with guides on your screen. You can do a lot of other things in the layer panel, such as changing the background color of your canvas, which I can do by tapping here and then selecting any color. I often like to work with black backgrounds, so this is how I'll select the background to start with. You can just tap done. I can also select multiple layers at the same time by swiping to the right, like so. Now both of these layers are selected and I can move them around. I can also put these layers in a group to allow me to turn them off and on as an entire group, or move them around as a group as well. Swiping to the left on a layer gives me a few other options, including locking it, which means I won't be able to make any changes to it until I unlock it. I can also duplicate it or delete it. I can tap back on the layer to exit out of these options. Let's now walk through the tools at the top left side of the screen. Starting at the far right, the arrow icon indicates the Move tool. When I tap on the Move tool, I can move around the item that I have selected. In this case, right now I have layer 1 selected, so when I tap on the Move tool, I can move layer 1 around with my pencil. I can also move multiple layers together by selecting them each, again with a right swipe. Now if I tap the Move tool, I'll be able to move both layers around together. To stop the move, all I have to do is untap the arrow. We can also do a lot more with each layer by tapping on it, but I'll save a review of these at more advanced options for a future workshop. I can also make selections in Procreate, and what that means is that I can select specific areas of my drawing to manipulate. The tool that's immediately to the left of the Move tool, or the arrow, is the Selection tool, and it looks like an S that's made out of ribbons. There are several ways to make selections. I'm going to demonstrate the freehand one. And again, the selection will apply to whatever I have selected. In this case, it's both layers. So if I tap on the Selection tool, and then draw a freehand selection on the screen that you can see indicated with the dotted line that's moving, I can then select another tool, like the Move tool, and move my selection on the screen. And you can see that it moved that curved selection, not just the rectangular area that's indicated here. Again, I can undo this by doing a 2-finger tap on the screen, and I'm back to where I started. To the left of the Selection tool is the Adjustments panel, which is indicated here. I won't go over every one of these, but I'll give you a quick example of one of them just to show you how you can use it. In this case, if I go back to my layers, I have layer 1 selected, so whatever adjustment I make will apply to the 2 vertical lines that are on layer 1. I'll go back to my Adjustments panel and select the Gaussian blur option and layer. Now as I touch my pencil to the screen and move it to the right, you'll see the 2 vertical red and green lines in the center gradually become more and more blurry as I move the pencil to the left and right. And you can see a blue bar at the top of the screen showing the intensity of the blur. The final tool in the top left corner of our screen that's next to the Adjustments panel is the Actions panel. One feature in the Actions panel that I really wanted to highlight is your ability to insert a file or insert a photo. This can be really useful for adding guides that you can use to letter on top of. I'll show you how. I'm going to start by hiding these 2 layers. Because they're in a group, I can just hide the entire group. I'm now going to create a brand new layer on top of my group, and this is the layer where I want to put my lettering guides. If I now go back to the Actions panel and select the Insert a File option, I can navigate to where I have my lettering guides. In this case, these 2 files are also included with the Black Letter Freebies pack. One is a white guideline and the other one is black. The white is great for working on a dark background and the black works well against light backgrounds. Because my background is currently black, I'm going to use the white one. All I have to do is tap on the image and Procreate will load my picture onto the current layer. Once it's imported, I can move it around. The Move tool is selected by default, which you can see here. I can also rotate the guides by grabbing the screen handle and moving it around, or by using my fingers on the screen to rotate and also to zoom in or out if I'd like so. I can now create a new layer on top of my lettering guide, and as I work on top of the guides, drawing my lettering, I can then hide the guide layer underneath, and it will look like it was never there to begin with. A couple of other tools in the Actions panel to be aware of. This is also one of the places where you can share your files in Procreate format or several other formats that are commonly used. I just remembered that there's one additional feature that I wanted to show you about working with the canvas. In order to demonstrate this, I'm going to change my canvas color back to white, again by going to the Layers panel here. I'm going to tap on the background color and make it white again. Now if I tap away from the color panel, I'm back on my canvas. Working with a canvas in Procreate is a lot like working with a piece of paper. There are the basic things that I can do, like rotate my page around or my canvas around on the screen. I can make it vertically here and then continue to work with the same brushes. as I was working before. I can turn it upside down, and I can rotate it back around to where I started. As you can probably tell, I can also zoom out, and I can also zoom in. I can zoom way in and work with lines almost at a pixel level. One handy gesture to be aware of is how to resize the canvas back to fit your iPad screen. And to do that, all I have to do is do a quick pinch of the screen, which I'll demonstrate now. As I'm working with the canvas and moving it around and zooming in and out, if I want to zoom back out so that it fits the screen, just a quick pinch and the canvas will resize to fit the screen. Now that we have a good understanding of all of the tools, let's start with a sample project. For the sample project, I'm going to use the capital T that I created as part of my Flourished Majuscule series last year. First, I'm going to start by duplicating the canvas. In the gallery view, I'll tap select. I'll then select the Majuscule T and then tap here on duplicate. Now that I've got a duplicate of that previous project, I can keep this one safe as it was and then edit the duplicate while keeping the original safe. I'll now tap on the duplicate to open it. The way these projects usually start is with an empty canvas, obviously, so I'll just turn off the layers to show that. I'll typically add a grid, which can be done with one of my grid brushes that comes with any of the brush packs. I'll tap on this large grid. Then I can zoom out of the canvas and add a grid just by drawing it onto the screen, like so. I'll just fill the entire screen almost with a grid, not being too worrisome about any gaps or anything like that. Again, I'm just using these as guides. I would then tap on the layer and reduce the opacity of these guides so that they're not totally visible while I'm working. Again, today I'll just be using the original letter as a guide, but I just wanted you to be aware of this way of working. I'll now turn off this guide layer because I won't need it since I'm using this layer as a template. I'll just tap on the checkbox and tap my T back on. Because I'm going to be working on top of this, I don't want it to be 100% visible. To make it a little less visible, I'm just going to adjust the opacity by tapping on the layer and tapping the N. And then I'm going to reduce it to a comfortable level. I'm going to leave it at a higher opacity than I would usually use, just so you can still see it on the screen while we're working. I'll now create a brand new layer, which will let me work on top of this one and then hide it when I'm finished. I'll now get started by selecting a new brush. The original T was made using the marble brush collection that's available in my shop, so I'll try something different today. Today I'll pick something from the Bewitched series, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to select a 45-degree angle Bewitched brush, and I'll use a scroll nib with a shaded center today. I'll just tap on this, and then I'll check the brush size. That looks pretty good. I'll use a blue and orange color scheme for the new T, and I'm just going to use two colors that are available in my palette. Using my pinch gesture, I'm going to fit the canvas to the size of the screen, and then I'll start writing. I'm going to construct this T with just a few simple strokes. We'll start with a curved line, and as I write this line, I'm going to vary the pressure. I used a lighter pressure here at the top and at the bottom, which makes it look like the stroke is fading in and out. Gives it almost a 3D look, which you can see here as I hide the bottom layer. I'll now create the second stroke, and again I'm going to start with a little light pressure, and then I'm going to increase the pressure near the center and start to release as I get further near the end. I'll create the third stroke using a similar approach, light, harder pressure, and then light again. And now to add these two flourishing strokes on the sides, all I'm going to do is rotate my canvas. I'll then zoom in a little bit so that I can see a little bit more clearly what I'm writing. And I'm going to check to make sure I've got an angle that I'm happy with, because the brush angle will stay the same as I rotate the canvas. So if I start like this, it will end up filling this space, which isn't quite as nice or what I'm looking for. So I'll turn the canvas to get an angle that I'm happy with, and then I'll add a couple of these lines here, again using the same approach as I did before. Light pressure at first, harder pressure, followed by light pressure again. And as you can see here, with just these few simple lines, I've now created this new version of the T in blue using the Bewitched black letter brushes that have this interesting line effect. Now, because I'd like to add my flourishes in a different color and I'd like to be able to adjust them without making any changes to the base art, I'm going to put them onto another layer. The first items that I like to add to these Flourished Majuscules are outline style elements. I don't necessarily outline the entire letter, but I'll outline or add lines to specific areas of the drawing. Again, as you can see here, outlines are here and on the bottom, and other areas just have flourishes. So to add the outlines, I'm going to select a different brush. Again, I'll stick to my Flourished Magiskill series here, and I'll pick the Fumos brush, which kind of has a smoky look. And I'm just going to test the size of the brush. I think that's too big for the outlines. So I'm going to come over here and go with a smaller brush size. We'll pick around 15%. And I'm also going to change the color. Let's go with this cool orange. So now I'm just going to go in, zooming in, and draw outlines around the letter. I can break up the lines, or I can even add pressure to make some spots thicker and some spots a little bit lighter, as you can see here. So now I've got an outline there. I'll add a couple more here on the top. Again, just varying the pressure will give it a little less or more opacity and thickness. Come over here and add some additional lines here to the end. Okay, there's a couple of lines there. Let's go ahead and add an outline to this side of the stroke. I'm just going to push a little bit harder where I want the line to be a little bit more opaque and a little bit wider. And for this brush, I designed it so that the pressure impacts both the opacity and the thickness of the line. So there we go. Now we've got a few interesting outline strokes around these main shapes in the letter. Another element that I like to add are these vertical icicle type shapes. To add those, I do like to have the grid in place because it helps me write in straight lines. So I'm going to reactivate my blue grid, and as I mentioned before, I'm going to make the opacity a little bit lower so that it's not quite as visible. So I created a new layer, and we'll zoom in to this area so that I can get a little bit more fine control over the lines I'm going to make. I'll often start on an area where I added more pressure and draw an initial dot, and then lighten the line as I draw it down. And then as I hold, the line will straighten, and I can pull it or just leave it like that. I'll often also add a couple of additional icicles right next to the one that I drew first, like so. Maybe a shorter one, maybe one a little further back here. And I'll just keep working through the piece like this, looking for spots to add these elements until I'm happy with how it looks. So again, I'd probably add one up here. Let's add one really quickly. Lighten the pressure, hold it, straighten it out, make it longer or shorter. And maybe one more behind it, and I'll just leave that one there. They don't always have to be perfectly straight. Let's just go ahead and add one more here for fun, or maybe a couple more. In this case, I'll use the straightening tool, and here we'll add one right next to it. Maybe this one will be really short, and maybe I'll add one here that's really, really long. There we go, like so. I would usually go through and add these elements everywhere where I drew a line of this color, but we'll keep it simple and just use these three additions here that I added just now. The next element that I add to these pieces are flourish lines. I'm going to hide my grid layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer to keep the flourishes separate as well. I'll now select Periculum, the other detail brush from the Bewitched collection, and then tap on the screen. I'll just double check to make sure I'm on a new layer. Yes, and I'll make my template layer visible again. Now I can see the flourishes that I previously added. So it looks like here I added some small flourishes to these 2 points. Also, I added a large one here at the bottom, and then I added one that's a little bit tangential at the top of the T. So to add those again using this new brush, and this brush is really cool because it will vary the brightness and the thickness based on the pressure you add. So it can be really cool for adding lines that look like they're magic spells or something fun like that. So I'll just start here from the bottom and roughly follow the pressure and direction of the line underneath, like so. In this case, I started with more pressure to make it look like it's connected to the T, and then let up as I progressed with the stroke. Here it looks like we've got a thin start followed by a thick start and then a thin one again. And then if I zoom in here, I can also turn the canvas to make it a little bit easier for me to draw the line. And we'll draw this tangential one here, thicker in the middle and then lighter at the top. And just like so, we've created a really interesting variation of that other Magiskill T. I really hope you had fun today and found today's workshop useful and helpful. Remember, if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you, so please reach out at any time. Also, just a quick reminder, if you'd like a set of free blackletter Procreate brushes, you can get that and a whole lot more by joining my newsletter community at blackletterfreebies.com. And for some fun and complete blackletter brush collections for Procreate, you can also visit my shop at blacklettershop.com. Thank you so much for digitally blacklettering with me today. I hope you have an awesome day, and I will see you next time.